All right. Hi, everyone. I see activity on the chat. So thanks for joining Mark, Rachel, Cami, Kristen, and cool. So we're here for another Automate This. Hello, I'm Jennifer Lee, Admin Evangelist at Salesforce. And if you're joining us for the first time, the series will be live streamed every month, and you can catch it back here and watch it on video on demand on the same live stream page. So with Automate This, if you're joining us for the first time, admins will learn how and be inspired by trailblazers who solve real-world business problems with automation. You can learn about and discuss best practices and automation topics that are top of mind for admins. And the best part, you can ask questions and interact live with the people who are watching this broadcast now or live with the presenters. All right, so just a reminder, the best way to be notified of when we go live is to set a reminder on the live stream episode itself. And then you'll get a reminder by email the day of the event. And I love when our audience interacts with one another. So post your comments on the chat. But if you want to interact with me or my guest presenter, start your question with a Q colon so I can easily scan through any questions to identify those for the Q&A in a little bit. All right, so here's what we're going to cover in today's episode. We'll learn about Sunil's strategy for migrating a process to record-triggered flow. I know that is pretty top of mind for admins. And we'll also learn how awesome admins should avoid, and why awesome admins should avoid hard coding in your automations. And then lastly, we'll learn how to use Flow to create custom notifications in place of emails. All right, so today I'm joined by Sunil Matthew, a lead application administrator at Relativity. So Sunil, please introduce yourself to our Automate This audience.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. As Jen mentioned, my name is Sunil Matthew. I am a lead application administrator here at Relativity, which is a software company in Chicago. I began my Salesforce career in 2014 and have been here at Relativity for the last 5 years as an admin.
Great. So I'm always interested in hearing how people learn Flow. So how did you learn it?
Well, like most admins, I learned Flow in stages. Back when Salesforce was hosting World Tour events, I went to the World Tour event in Chicago and was introduced to Process Builder there. They had like a Genius Bar kind of setup where you could talk to expert admins. And they introduced me to some of the capabilities within the tool, within Process Builder. It was pretty eye-opening to see that an admin could start to do the things that was once considered like Apex code only, like creating records and updating related records, etc. And then later on, my major introduction to Flow itself was through another admin on my team at the time. He actually had a project where the business requirement was to build a tool that tracked product exclusivity. We were at a media company, and when ad space in a certain region is sold, it can't be sold again. It's like a unique buy. This admin used two separate flows. One was an auto launch flow, which would create new ad blocks for our sales team to sell,
Mhm.
and then a screen flow where our fulfillment team could actually go through the ad blocks and actually mark them as sold, assign them to an account and to a time frame, things like that. It was pretty awesome seeing him do that all through declarative means,
Right.
and then he kind of walked me through the logic and seeing like how this is actually attainable to do, and that kind of got me going down that flow path.
Awesome. So you're going to talk about a topic that is very top of mind for our admins, especially with workflow roles processes going away, and that's migrating your processes to Flow. So can you share this, what that experience has been like, what your strategy, any nuggets that you can share with the admins out there?
Yeah, yeah. As a Salesforce team, we have actually already met specifically within our company to talk about the retirement of workflows and process builders. As Jen mentioned, and in case you're not aware, Salesforce has mentioned that workflows and process builders will be going away eventually, and Flow will become like the true declarative automation tool of choice. And though there's not a defined date for this change just yet, Salesforce did just in the last release restrict the creation of new workflows,
Mhm.
so it's coming, and we don't want to get like sideswiped by it. We want to be prepared for it. For starters, we want to make sure everyone on our team was aware of the change and aligned that we're truly in a flow first era going forward. Um, Thankfully, Salesforce has given us a pretty long runway here, so we're not rushing quite yet. And for the time being, we're playing things a little passively. Um, when a request comes in from a business or stakeholder, or there's some issue with an existing piece of automation, we just take that as an opportunity to migrate that automation to
Mhm.
Flow, and deprecate or deactivate the legacy automation that might exist in Workflow or Process Builder. But we imagine there'll be a time in the very near future, maybe even as early as next year, where this becomes more of an active project. And instead of waiting for things to come to us, we will actually scour our org and find workflows and process builders that have to move over to Flow. The important thing here is making sure that we're not just doing a straight lift and shift, because there's a
Mhm.
lot of um, a lot of efficiencies we could gain by doing it thoughtfully, right? And working with our business and making sure legacy automation that exists is still relevant and necessary, and trying to find ways to make that work a little bit nicer. In regards to the technical side of the strategy, we always feel that less is more and simplicity is key.
Mhm.
And the power and flexibility of Flow kind of allows us to collapse multiple workflows and multiple process builders into a small number, or maybe even just a single flow, which is a really cool way to manage that automation on an object. We've also talked about naming conventions to make things easier to find. Just best practices like requiring descriptions, things like that, just to make sure that when we come back to things in the future, we're just leaving good breadcrumbs for our team. There are some great blog posts you can find in the ecosystem about how to build out this strategy, because might look different for your team than it looks for us at Relativity. So there's a lot of good discussions to be had around that.
Yeah, I know when I was a customer and I went through the process of doing the migration, I did find it, and we didn't just do a lift and shift. So I did find out that there were some workflows and processes that didn't need to be there, or the business didn't even know existed. So I was able to get rid of those, and I love the concept of KISS, keep it simple. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's great. So, why don't you lay out the business case for us for the automation that you built in a process builder that you've migrated to Flow, and also the context around moving from email notifications to custom notifications. And for those who out there who don't know what custom notifications, if you could just describe what that is.
Yeah, sure, sure. So our org at Relativity is an older org. It's been around for a while, and previously, after a case was created and picked up by a support agent, oftentimes email communications would happen in Outlook itself, and agents would then CC the Salesforce email the case address, so that those emails were then copied into Salesforce, like it would be sent over to Salesforce as well. And it's not a great process. And there are a variety of reasons why this was bad for us and needed some modernization. Just walking through some of those, like what if the email the case address was dropped from an email communication and then that email didn't get into Salesforce, right? There's a little bit of risk there. It's also a poor branding experience with emails coming from agents, work email addresses instead of from a unified group support address. Um, Also, if a case were to get closed and then maybe that same contact at a company has a subsequent issue later on, sometimes they were emailing agents directly because they have their direct email address, instead of opening a case through email the case and through our routing system setup. A lot of people, maybe liked an experience they had with an agent, so want to make sure they got that agent again, so would email them directly. And that could cause delays, frustration, inaccurate data. There's always the chance the agent has moved on or in a new role within the company, and then there's just delays that happen there. And then with the eventual change from using reference ID for email threading to using the email header, this process just simply wouldn't work anymore. You couldn't CC and the email case and have the ref ID in there, and then just kind of have it attached back to the original case. Um, so that's kind of where the issue lied. Um, we spent months with our support team to modernize their process, and I'll share my screen real fast here and show you what we kind of came up with. We moved them over to a send email action on their Lightning record page. So here is their case. You'll see that in our org, we've renamed the case object as ticket. So you might hear me kind of go back and forth between ticket and case. Just want to let you know that that's why. But if we actually have a send email action here on our object, and from here, we actually have moved to a setup now where agents are emailing directly out of this record instead of using Outlook. The benefits here is you can kind of see it. The from address is our support email distribution opposed to an agent's specific email. The subject is automated. It is defined by the case itself opposed to whatever someone were to type in. You can take an email template from your Salesforce org and insert it right here. This one is actually a default email template that you could, anytime someone opens up this email action, this template will load for them. But you could actually click this button and use a new template on the fly. And the email action could actually be customized to add additional fields from the case record so that when you send the email, you could also stipulate other data points you want to change. So you only have to do one send, and it'll send the email and update the case at the same time. So, this is awesome. This works out really nicely for them. They're able to kind of get the branding experience they want, keep everybody in the org. And we're able to email using Salesforce email templates and that common support email address. So everything's great. Case closed. Let's go home. Let's go on vacation for a little bit. But there's always side effects to changes you make in Salesforce, and just being aware of the implications and downstream effects is kind of an important part of being an admin as well. So one side effect of this new process is that support agents obviously no longer get email notifications when an email comes in for a case that they're working on. They used to come directly to their Outlook. Now it goes directly to Salesforce. This was a major concern for the team, as we have pretty tight SLAs, like service level agreements with our clients, and we want to always ensure customer satisfaction in all cases. The stopgap here was to create a Salesforce report that would show any new cases, show any cases with newer email message records. And the report data was accurate, but it was a little cumbersome. It required agents to proactively check the report, proactively refresh it. We just felt like there has to be a better option for this information to get in front of an agent instead of an agent having to go to it. And that's kind of where custom notifications pops in. So what are custom notifications? And with the kind of the rollout and the proliferation of Lightning experience, you may have noticed this little bell in the top right corner of Salesforce. That is a notification bell. And so Salesforce could actually send us notifications using this bell, but we could actually utilize it as well to send notifications to users. So I'm just going to flip real quickly here to being logged in as a user. And you can see here in their custom notifications, or in their notification bell, they actually have a handful of notifications that are ready to be read. And if you click on it, you can see all these notifications that are created by the system, by automation. These are all created via Flow and sent to an agent in real time, telling them information about whatever logic we've built in. You'll see that we have a subject here and a body, and we'll kind of get to how that's built. But this is what a custom notification is. And you can at the end of the day, have custom notifications come from a variety of places, and they'll all get populated into this notification bell section here. And that badge that showed here previously does appear dynamically. So even if an agent is working on a different ticket, or if they're looking at account information, that bell will show up without you having to like refresh the browser page or anything like that. So it's a really nice way to get that information in front of an agent right away. So some information about custom notifications. It can be sent out using dev tools like Apex and the API, and declarative tools like Flow. Um, it is an alert that gets right in front of the agent right away. They don't have to do anything to receive them. One benefit, that our team really enjoys is that it keeps agents in app. It keeps them in Salesforce, and it doesn't. They don't have to context switch between Salesforce and Outlook. It removes the wasted time of clicking over and being distracted by something coming in via Outlook. From this notification, you could actually specify a target record that you want the agent to be navigated to if they click the notification. And I'll show you how they do that. And you could send that notification to a user. You could send it to a collection of users, a public group, a queue, an account, or an opportunity team. So there's a lot of different ways you could send a notification to people, or a lot of different groups you could kind of have looped into that notification. So let's start with kind of the initial implementation of this, which was done in Process Builder. So let's go over to that Process Builder now. Here we have the process that was initially created to satisfy this business request. We have a process builder that triggers off the email message object. Email message is a system object for anyone who has Service Cloud and email the case set up. Email message is an object where records are created anytime an email comes into the system or goes out from the system. So anytime an email comes into an email the case, or a reply comes into an email the case, an email message record is created, storing that data. So that's our triggering object, is email message. Here we have a couple nodes that where we're evaluating criteria. You could also look at these as decision points. And what we're checking to see here is, does it meet the criteria we need for us to move towards the action? So I'm just going to open this up real quickly so we can see what we're looking at. In our use case, a couple things that we're checking to see, is this a support ticket? We're checking the record type on the email message. Sorry, I should state the email message is related to the case. The case is the parent of the email message. So I just wanted to make sure you understood what this dot notation is telling us. So here it's checking the record type of that parent, which is our support ticket. It's just checking to see, is that email message incoming, and that's true. And here we're checking the owner of that case, the case we were referencing. And down here, we're checking to see if that case is open or closed. And we only want to deal with tickets that are still open at this point. I want to kind of linger on line 4 for a little bit. Here, we're checking to see the owner ID of the case. Owner ID is a system level object, and owners for cases could be either agents or queues. And one of the business requirements is that if it's owned by an agent or a queue, we kind of want the logic to work a little bit differently. If it's owned by an agent, we just want that agent to receive that custom notification. But if it's owned by a queue, we actually want our support manager public group to receive that notification, which would mean every person in that public group would receive that notification. So we need to create criteria here that kind of check to see if it's owned by an agent or owned by the queue. One way you can do that is by checking the ID. All system objects in Salesforce, all objects in Salesforce, period, have a 3-letter prefix at the beginning of the ID, a beginning of like the 15 or 18 character ID. For system objects, or for standard objects, that ID is the same for every Salesforce org. So any Salesforce org you go into, the ID of a queue is always going to start with 00G. And similarly, the ID of a user will always start with 005. So that is how we're differentiating. Okay, is this case owned by a queue or owned by a user? And depending on that, we're kind of navigating towards our actions. So let's go see what our actions are then. So here we're using the send custom notification action in Process Builder. We're giving it a name. We're identifying a notification type, which I'll get to in a second. Here we're identifying the notification recipient. So this is the queue owned path that we're following. So we're going to actually send it to the public group called Customer Support Management. And here we define what that notification is going to tell us. So this is the subject, which I had shown you on that notification, and this is the body. Um, Here, as you can tell, we are using merge fields to kind of add some more contextual information, so that when someone looks at the notification, they have information, right away. They don't necessarily need to click in immediately, but they just have more context there. And here, let's go to the notification for the agent-owned ticket. Just the notification title looks a little bit different. It says new email for ticket you own, opposed to queue-owned ticket. And the notification body is here as well. One thing I did want, and also the notification recipient for this one is the owner of the parent, which is the owner of the case. And you can see that there's a couple different types of notification recipients you could have here, and it's always expecting an ID value. Um, One thing I will kind of linger on, if you've never worked with custom notifications before, custom notifications do have notification types that you have to create and identify. From the setup menu here in Salesforce, you could go to custom notifications. And obviously you can see we're in Lightning for everything. But from this custom notifications, you could create a new custom notification type. And it's a really quick thing to create where you just create a name and then decide, is it going to be accessible via mobile or desktop or both? And then once you do that, you will be able to choose that notification type right here in Process Builder. And then from here, you save it and you activate it, and you're on your way. So, Process Builder is great for what it is, and that gets the job done. But we know Flow is going to be the one declarative automation tool going forward. And the best practice for admins, like we mentioned earlier, is not only build using Flow, but also migrate other declarative automation to Flow when possible. And because of some of the complex logic and branching, you could really kind of power up these automations and take them to the next level. So let's take a look at how this process builder looks when we migrate it to Flow. So here is a flow of that, essentially that same logic executing in Flow now instead of in Process Builder. Here we have a record triggered flow. So let's jump into the start element of this flow to see what's triggering it. Here we see it's being triggered by the creation of an email message record, like we talked about earlier. The only condition we're calling out at this point in the flow is that it's an incoming email message. That way, there's a lot of emails that go back and forth. We're just narrowing the scope of what's being evaluated here. And then down here, I just want to call out, with some of the recent enhancements to Flow, we now have the ability to do before save flows and after save flows. And that's what we're seeing here. A before save flow is just kind of like a quicker update that you could execute, but be aware that on a before save flow, you can only really run an update on the actual record that's triggering the action. So in this case, a before save flow could only run an update on that email message that's being triggered. But that's not what we're trying to do here. What we're actually trying to do is do an action and do like an outbound message type of deal within the system. So we need to use an after save flow. With an after save flow, is where you really start to feel the power of Flow. You could update any record and perform any action, like send an email, or in our case, create a custom notification. And it's a flow that runs after the record is saved. So it has all the information from the record and related records in order to do actions and things like that. We're also going to be including a run asynchronously path um, to this flow, and I'll explain exactly why we're going to do that in a little bit. So if we come over here, we could see how the flow, because we have a run asynchronously path, it gives us an immediate path and asynchronous path. So we're going to run this flow asynchronously. The reason why we're doing that is because running a flow asynchronously pretty much takes the flow transaction, or sorry, the record creation transaction of the email message and splits it up. So when an email message is created, um, there's a full transaction of things that Salesforce goes through in order to save it to the database. Like it checks validation rules, it checks workflows and flows, it checks all those different things you have in place there. If something along the way fails in that whole chain of events, the whole transaction gets rolled back, right? Because email message is something that we want to make sure that email message gets into Salesforce no matter what. We don't want an error in this flow to roll back the creation of that email message. So that's why we're running it asynchronously. We're pretty much saying, hey, create that email message first and then do this automation. We want to make sure that email message is safe and in Salesforce and ready to go for an agent. And then we're going to notify them that that email message is there, if that makes sense. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to run into a decision element. This decision element is just going to check a couple other data points on the email message to make sure to kind of guide it down one of these flow paths. So let's take a look at what we have here. This is very similar to the decision elements that we had in the process builder. We're checking to see if the ticket owner starts with 005 for agents. We're checking to see if the ticket is closed, ticket/case. I told you I would go back and forth without even realizing it. And we're checking to make sure that the record type is our support record type. And same here for the queue owned. We're doing the same checks, but instead we're checking for 00G instead of 005. So that's kind of creating the different paths and outcomes we could have from this decision. And then from that, we have these paths built out that we could start to do a little bit of customization. So let's go down this agent-owned path, and we're getting to an assignment here. An assignment is the ability to take a value or data and ascribe it to some metadata. So we have these variables here. So a variable is just a container where you're just kind of dropping in information. So we created a text variable called notification subject. If you remember when we looked at the notification earlier, the subject was in bold at the top, kind of like you'd expect the subject to be. And we're saying that the notification subject for an agent-owned ticket is going to be new email for ticket you own. And that is what we're assigning the value of the variable here. And then we created a second variable, but this one is a collection variable, so you can have multiple items in there. And we're adding the owner of the ticket. So we're adding the ID of that ticket owner into this variable so that now we have two variables. One of them is the subject and one of them is the recipient. But for the queue-owned ticket, that's going to look a little bit different. And that's why we're doing those assignments differently. One, we still have that same notification subject variable, but we're putting different text in there this time. This time we're putting queue-owned ticket instead of ticket you own. And then we have the same notification recipients variable, but in this instance, we're putting a different value in there instead. We're actually putting the ID of the customer support management public group. So you'll see here that, wait a minute, that doesn't look like an ID. That looks like a bunch of letters, not a bunch of like numbers and letters jumbled together. What we're using here is actually a custom label. And the reason we're using custom label is, like we mentioned before, we do not want to hard code IDs in flows. Hard coding an ID is, the act of actually taking the 15 or 18 digit character ID and putting it directly into the flow here. And what that causes is ultimately confusion, because sometimes, you might look at a flow that was created a year ago and just see a bunch of, letters and numbers and not know what it's in reference to. Also, if for some reason the ID has to change and you need to do something else with that data point, you actually have to come back into the automation and change it, right? Like you have to take that ID out. Um, and You also have to, if that ID changes, you have to find all the different places that that ID is used and then make those changes there. So you could use an ID in like code or flow or whatever. It just creates a lot of tech debt and a lot of places where things could go a little bit wrong. Um, the best practice instead should be to use something like what we do at Relativity is we use custom labels, but you could also use custom metadata, something like that. Pretty much a container for your IDs instead. Um, Custom labels could be found in the setup menu. If you type in custom labels, it's right there. Here you can see that we have a ton of custom labels where we store IDs. We have queues, we have roles, we have ticket record types. We have just a ton of different IDs that we store in custom labels. And what this allows us to do is instead of referencing the ID specifically in automation, we reference the custom label instead. Um, so that if for some reason in the future, and I should also mention that custom labels are, you're able to reference them in a variety of places, not only in Flow, but you could reference a custom label in Apex code. You could reference it in validation rules. You could reference it in a bunch of different areas. And in addition to it being easier to read, like you could come to the screen having never seen this flow before, you could come to the screen and be like, oh, okay, so the notification, it's going to this public group called Customer Support Management. It's very easy to just know it and not have to dig down and find out what an ID is for. Also, if for some reason if the management team decided they don't want it to go to that group anymore, they want it to go to a different group, or they want to rename their group or whatever, instead of going into this flow and updating the ID, you could actually go to the custom label itself. Just hit edit on the custom label. Here's the group that we're just referencing. We could just hit edit on this custom label and update this value. And what will end up happening is anything in the ecosystem that is referencing that custom label kind of instantaneously gets updated like downstream, right? So if there's automation, if there's a flow, if there's a validation rule that references that, now all of that is updated just by updating this one custom label value. So it's a nice way to make life a little bit easier for yourself and just follow best practices of not hard coding those IDs straight into the system. So yeah, so now we know if it's going to be agent owned or queue owned. We've assigned a couple variables. Let's kind of move on to this custom notification action here. Let's pop this guy open, and we see a couple different data points that we're adding here. One is a custom notification type ID. Here we had created the custom notification, and we want to take the ID from there and store it in the custom label like we did previously. And then we're just referencing that custom label here as well. So we're saying we're using this notification type. We're using a text template called notification body. A text template is just essentially that. It's just a block of text that you could create, and you could dynamically add merge fields from related records. You could add merge fields from, maybe you queried a data point earlier in the flow. You could reference it now in the text template. So we're creating a text template here for the body of the custom notification. Here for notification title, we're using that notification subject variable that we populated earlier in the assignments. And then for the IDs, we're using the notification recipients variable that we populated earlier in the assignments. Here for sender ID, we're using kind of this default workflow sender we have in our org. We call it TicketBot, but we have that ID stored in a custom label, and we're just referencing that label here. And then here we have target ID. I mentioned earlier how when a user clicks on a custom notification, you could send them to pretty much any record that you have access to here. So in this case, we're just sending them to the record that triggered the flow. That's what this $ record means. So we're sending them to the record that triggered the flow. But we could also send them to, maybe we want to actually send them to the case instead, or to maybe the contact on, maybe there's a use case where you might want to send them to the contact on that case. You could just use dot notation within the flow to navigate them to whatever record you want them to go to when they click on that custom notification. So it's kind of a cool little nugget to have your agents land where they want to land. Um, so that is essentially how this flow was created and built. Um, it's um, um, it's essentially kind of defining these four data points here: the notification type ID, notification body, notification title, and the recipients. And then you might have to populate those variables through other aspects of the flow, like we did with those assignments. But that's kind of essentially what it needs. And you could see that these two, the sender ID and the target ID, aren't necessarily required. You could turn it off if you don't want to utilize that function. But that's essentially how this flow is created. And how we use it currently. And like I said, you'll see these notifications here in Salesforce as they pop up in the notification bell section. So that's kind of the end of the demo here. Jen, I'll kind of kick it back over to you.
Thank you, Sunil, for sharing your strategy for migrating processes to Flow and using custom notifications instead of email alert. So as we transition to Q&A, just a quick reminder that if you do have a question, start it with Q:, and so we can just easily flag that for Q&A. So we'll be there in a couple of seconds. Okay, so just quickly here. Oh, this is super tiny. Hold on, let's make this bigger. So just a quick comment from Kim, who is totally loving the session. She says she focuses a lot on Service Cloud and there's always a shortage of applicable use cases, but this rocks. So thank you for the presentation, and thanks, Kim, for your feedback. All right, our question comes today from Mark Jones, all the way in London. Hi, Mark. Thanks for joining us. His question is, sorry, I'm a little confused. Is it better to use custom label rather than getting the ID of the notification through a get records? Would the value in the custom label not change when deployed?
Yeah, I think there are a variety of good ways to store IDs. We use custom labels, especially for metadata that already exists in production. We're able to get the ID and store it as a custom label. So then when you deploy it, the metadata that the ID that the label is referencing is already in the new environment. So it's not going to change along the way. But the get element within a process is another great way to get an ID. You would obviously need to know like what object you're pulling from, things like that. But it's another way definitely to dynamically get an ID. But in our case, we use the custom labels, especially for IDs that already exist in production, and we're just kind of pulling it down into the lower environment, into like our sandbox environments. That way, we don't have to do another get request in there.
All right. Let's get another question in there. And this is from Easy. How did you migrate from the process builder to Flow? Migrate to Flow doesn't support process builder, right? So yes, that is a correct statement. We are looking at implementing the migration tool that allows you to migrate processes to Flow sometime next year. So that is on the roadmap, but I'll turn it over to you to answer how you did the migration.
Yeah, we should safe harbor that statement, shouldn't we? But Yeah, so this one you do have to currently you do have to create it from scratch. There is a migrate to flow option for workflows that I've looked at and I've used, but I don't know if we'll use it often because, as I mentioned earlier, um, the the migrate to flow or the migrate to flow from workflow, if I remember correctly, would just do like a one for one. Like here's a workflow, now turn it into a flow. But I think we want to be a lot more thoughtful about how we create those flows, and ideally we want to take 10 workflows and create one flow. So we might use that migration tool in some instances, but I think for the most part we'll probably be creating a lot of these flows manually, opposed to using the migration tool.
So I guess in lieu of having a migration tool, like how did you take your process builder and then translate it into the flow that you built?
Yeah, I think that kind of comes with looking at your process builder and realizing that a lot of the elements of a flow are there. It just kind of looks a little bit different. So when you look at a process builder, you have at the top, it tells you your triggering object. And for a record triggered flow, you can now decide what object you're triggering off of. For process builder, along the left hand side, you have your different criteria nodes. That's essentially decision elements, right? So, it's a little bit of a generalization, but the number of criteria nodes you have might end up being the number of decision paths you end up having. But that could obviously change depending on your specific use case. Um, and then kind of knowing that immediate actions and scheduled actions kind of go from there. So kind of looking at your process builder and realizing like a lot of those same elements exist in Flow, and then it's just a matter of arranging them to what makes sense for you.
All right. So if anyone still has any questions, start with the Q colon to post them in. Um, we'd like to hear. Oh, there's a new one. Great. All right. This is from A. What are some of the key issues you face moving from workflow or Apex to flow? Any major hurdles you can share?
Yeah, some of the for workflow to flow, some of the major hurdles are actually not technical, but like we mentioned, it's working with our business partners about what's still important. Like, what do we still need to execute on versus what is old. And this might only be an issue for orgs like ours that were created like 15 years ago, right? And have workflows literally that were created in 2007 that are still active. Um, and we need to, those are the type of workflows we're not going to just lift and shift to
Mhm.
2022, right? And we need to talk to the business about is this data point still needed? How could it be optimized? Something that old probably is not used anymore, and and just having those conversations with them and with our business intelligence team who handles our Tableau reporting, and just making sure that we're kind of working through the data implications of some of these changes. um, Apex to flow, we haven't done any Apex to flow at this point, so I wish I could give you some insight there, but just unable to at the moment. um, yeah. But yeah, we feel like technically, um, Flow just has so many more capabilities than a workflow did. And now that we could use workflow actions within a flow, it's even easier to do that migration and still use the same email alert or the same outbound message that we used in the workflow. We could just use it in Flow now. Um, so the hurdles are getting easier and easier to jump over. Yeah.
Another thing that I would note in terms of things to be aware of is when you're moving your workflow rules and processes to flow, understand the order of execution because that's really important because um, workflow rules and processes happen like later on in the order of execution where Your before save flow, which is just making a change to the record that fired the process, happens at the very top, right? And then you have your apex triggers, your before and after apex triggers. And then you have your after save flow around the workflow roles and process builder in terms of order of execution. So when you're doing your move from workflow roles and processes, understand that. Definitely do heavy regression testing of all your automation, including things that you might have in triggers for that object. Because if you're putting something that happened later on in the order of execution and you're moving it before an apex trigger, it might have a different behavior than what you expected that record to have. So definitely, do heavy testing before you move any of your new automation in. And there was another point that I was going to make, but that escapes me now. Um,
I think that also calls to the point we made earlier about keeping it simple, right? Like, some objects, like for us, our case object is a behemoth. Like
mhm,
15 years of automation will do that to you, right? But if you, in an ideal world, could start from scratch, like how would you build out the automation? It's like, well, you'd probably maybe just use one automation tool instead of having multiple. And then, like, nice thing about flow now is, in addition to creating paths, so you know what's going to happen first, you know what's going to happen second, you can actually order flows too and use something like Flow Trigger Explorer. I think I
mhm.
got the name right. You can use something like Flow Trigger Explorer to see what flows are happening on different record changes, and then change the order of that just by, like, changing a number on the flow, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, and you might have Apex doing things that now Flow can do just because way back when there wasn't that option and you only had the code route to take. So it might make sense to, as you say, moving from Apex to Flow, take some of that logic out so that now it's in the hands of the admin to maintain and not the developer to maintain. And also, when I was going through the process of doing the migration of workflow roles and processes, we did one object at a time. So you're not hitting everything across the board. So it's this major task, but taking little by little. So I ended up taking one of the case object. We were a service cloud based company. So taking everything that touched the case and modifying it so that you're only doing that testing once and not
Yeah.
having to come back to your users. Hey, I made a change to, I made this migration, now test it again. Oh, I migrated another one, now test that same thing again.
Yeah,
So, so really pooling those resources together.
that's
All
a good
right.
point.
So thank you, A, for that question. All right. Next question we have from Kim. Do they prefer seeing them there in notifications, or is there a way to review all past notifications?
Um, yeah,
Oh,
Kim had an earlier question too. That was kind
yeah,
of
sorry, I missed
similar.
that. Hold
No,
on. Let me bring
it
that
kind of.
in. Oh,
Yeah, it was a change, and it was a little bit. They were kind of going through this process of change anyway, since we're shifting them out of Outlook into the email action. Um, and then they're the ones that came to us and said, "Hey, um, we have this report that all of our agents have access to, and they're all just clicking refresh like every 5 minutes." Um, so they're the ones that said we just need something that's a little bit more dynamic. Um, so they're, all the feedback I've gotten has been positive. That they're able to see it there. They still have access to those reports as well, obviously, if they want to take a look at them. Um, when it comes to actual custom notifications, it is a newer tool in Salesforce. So, there's going to be changes and iterations to it. A couple things that I've noticed kind of working through it. One is that Salesforce has, it seems like it's an org wide limit for how many notifications are stored. But it's a high number. It's like 10,000 or something like that. And then as soon as it reaches that number, it's just gonna, start like rolling off those notifications at the bottom as new ones come in. But any custom notification that shows up under the bell for you will just kind of stay there, and it'll just kind of like keep growing to the bottom just as new ones come in. Um, so you could definitely review past notifications up to a certain point. Um, and then one thing our users have asked for as well is you could mark notifications as read, but you can't dismiss them currently. So anytime you go back to the bell, they'll still be there. They'll just be marked as read. So I don't know if that's something Salesforce is going to look at changing in the future, where you could actually dismiss a notification and not see it anymore. But currently, that list will just, once you, if it's an older notification, it'll just kind of be at the bottom, and just new ones will just come up on top.
Great. I'm just doing a quick scan to see if there are any more questions, and it looks like that might have been the last one. So thanks, Kim, for that. Great. All right, so to recap, we learned about Sunil's strategy of migrating a process to record-triggered flow. We also learned why awesome admins should avoid hard coding in your automations and code and validation roles and all the things. And then lastly, we learned how to use Flow to create custom notifications instead of email so that your users don't have to swivel from application to application. Okay, I am excited for next month's episode. So we have the creators of the beloved term Flownatics on our next episode. So that's Mark Ross and Brian Kwong. Brian is a Salesforce MVP, and Mark is the Flow Trailhead content writer at Salesforce. And they will share something that they're calling their mythical flow code with us. So it's really just a fun way for them to present their wisdom on flow best practices. So this session is beneficial for all. So no matter what stage you're at in your flow journey, set the reminder and join us next month for that episode. Great. So now it's your turn. So read the blog on admin.salesforce.com as to why you should avoid hard coding. And we provide 3 alternatives to avoiding hard coding in your org. And if you're new to custom notifications, well, you can learn even more about how you can use the Flow core action. So we included a link to 2 help articles for you to learn more. And lastly, we're going to have a blog post published tomorrow that deep dives into the content that you saw in today's episode so that you could potentially build it in your own org. All right, so thank you for being a guest on Automate This. I hope you had a great time presenting. I love the content that you shared.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I did have a great time.
Great. And thank you to all of you for joining us on this episode of Automate This. I appreciate your engagement, and please share with us what you thought of this episode and also what you want to see more of in next year's episode. So please complete this quick survey and let me know what you liked and again, what you want to see more of. So as I plan out next year's episode, we can get more of that content in there. And remember, the best way to be notified when we live stream is to set the reminder on that live stream episode, and you'll get a reminder, as well as you'll hear from all our various social channels. So please follow us on Twitter at Salesforce Admins, no I, LinkedIn, and the Trailblazer community. And see you next time.